Listen, most people work their entire lives and never actually become free. Why? They're building income, not assets. That's the brutal truth that separates the wealthy from the wage earner. In the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through these 10 fundamental principles that transformed how I understood money, wealth, and freedom during my decades of economic research and observation. And if you stay with me until the end, you'll discover exactly why your paycheck alone will never set you free, and what you must build instead to escape the cycle of financial dependence. So, before we dive in, do me a favor, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Because this community is built on people who refuse to accept financial mediocrity and are ready to understand what the wealthy have known for generations. The foundation that changes everything. Why income alone will never set you free. You know, I spent decades studying economic systems, markets, and human behavior. And one pattern emerged so clearly, so consistently, that it became impossible to ignore. The fundamental difference between those who achieve financial independence and those who remain trapped in economic anxiety isn't intelligence. It isn't luck. It isn't even the size of their paycheck. It's something far more profound. It's what they do with every dollar that passes through their hands. Let me share something with you that most people never grasp until it's too late. Your paycheck is not your path to freedom. Your paycheck is simply a tool, a starting point. And here's the uncomfortable truth that nobody wants to hear. You can earn a six-figure income and still live paycheck to paycheck. You can work for 40 years, receive raises, promotions, recognition, and still end up financially vulnerable when a crisis hits. Why? Because earning money and building wealth are two completely different activities. Think about this carefully. When you receive your paycheck, you're essentially receiving seeds. Every dollar is a seed with potential. Now, most people, and I watched this phenomenon throughout my entire career, most people immediately consume every seed they receive. They earn, they spend. They earn more, they spend more. The lifestyle expands perfectly in proportion to the income. It's a treadmill that never stops, and they never realize they're running in place. But there's another group, a smaller group, who understand something profound. They understand that seeds are not meant to be consumed entirely. Seeds are meant to be planted. And when you plant seeds strategically, something magical happens. Those seeds grow into trees, and those trees produce fruit. And that fruit is what actually sets you free, because the fruit keeps coming whether you're working or not, whether you're healthy or sick, whether you're 30 or 70. This is the essence of what I want you to understand today. The wealthy don't just work for money, they put money to work. There's a massive difference. When you work for money, your income stops the moment you stop working. When money works for you, income continues flowing regardless of your personal effort. That's not theory. That's the mathematical reality of compounding assets versus linear labor. Now, I know what some of you are thinking, but Milton, I don't earn enough to invest. I'm barely covering my bills, and I understand that feeling. I truly do. But here's what I discovered through years of economic research and observation. The amount you start with matters far less than the habit you establish. Because wealth isn't built through one large decision. Wealth is built through thousands of small decisions, repeated consistently over time, that compound into extraordinary results. Let me be brutally honest with you. If you cannot save when you earn little, you will not save when you earn much. The problem is never the amount. The problem is the philosophy. Your financial discipline at $30,000 per year determines your financial reality at $300,000 per year. The numbers change, but your character doesn't. And that's why so many lottery winners, athletes, and entertainers who receive massive windfalls end up broke. They had money, but they never developed the philosophy that sustains wealth. So here's the first massive shift I want you to make today. Stop measuring your progress by how much you earn. Start measuring your progress by how many assets you're building. An asset, a real asset, is something that puts money in your pocket consistently without requiring your constant labor. Rental properties that generate monthly income. Dividend-paying stocks that send you checks quarterly. Businesses that operate systematically and produce cash flow. Intellectual property that earns royalties. These are assets. These are the trees you plant today that feed you tomorrow. And here's what nobody tells you about this journey. The first few years are the hardest. You're planting seeds in soil you cannot see growing. You're sacrificing immediate gratification for future freedom. Your friends are upgrading their cars while you're upgrading your portfolio. Your coworkers are taking luxury vacations while you're taking calculated investment positions. It feels like you're falling behind, but you're not falling behind. You're playing a different game entirely. They're playing the income game. You're playing the asset game. And the asset game, my friend, is the only game that leads to actual freedom. Think about it this way. Imagine two individuals, same age, same income, same starting point. Person A spends 100% of their paycheck on lifestyle, rent, food, entertainment, comfort. Person B spends 90% on lifestyle and invests 10% into income-producing assets. After 1 year, the difference seems minimal. After 5 years, it's noticeable. After 10 years, it's significant. After 20 years, they're living in completely different financial realities. Person A is still dependent on their paycheck, still one crisis away from financial disaster. Person B has built a foundation of assets that generate income automatically, providing options, security, and freedom. This is not complicated mathematics. This is simple discipline applied consistently. And that's what makes it so powerful and simultaneously so rare. Because discipline requires something most people refuse to give: delayed gratification. You must be willing to say no to yourself today so you can say yes to yourself forever. You must be willing to plant seeds in your 20s and 30s so you can harvest abundance in your 40s, 50s, and beyond. So let me ask you directly, what are you building? Not what are you earning, what are you building? Because if the honest answer is nothing, then it's time for a fundamental change in philosophy. It's time to transform from a consumer into a builder, from an earner into an owner, from someone who works for money into someone who makes money work for them. That transformation doesn't happen through luck or inheritance. It happens through conscious, consistent, strategic decisions made with every dollar you receive. Starting today, starting now, starting with the very next dollar that enters your hand. The sacred practice that separates builders from consumers now. You might be saying, all right, Milton, I understand the concept. Assets are important. But how do I actually start? Building them when I have bills, responsibilities, and limited income? That's the exact question I want to address right now, because this is where theory meets reality. And this is where most people fail, not because they don't understand the concept, but because they never establish the fundamental habit that makes everything possible. Here's what I discovered through decades of economic observation. Wealth begins with one non-negotiable habit: paying yourself first. Not second, not last, not if there's anything left over. First, before bills, before entertainment, before anything else. You must establish this discipline immediately, or you will spend your entire life making everyone else wealthy while you remain financially vulnerable. Let me explain why this is so critical. Your brain operates on patterns and priorities. Whatever you prioritize consistently becomes automatic. Whatever you treat as optional remains inconsistent. When you pay yourself first, when you immediately set aside a portion of every dollar for investment before you allocate money to anything else, you're training your financial nervous system. You're establishing the foundational habit that every wealthy person I've ever studied, observed, or worked with maintains religiously. And here's the part that most financial advisors won't tell you honestly. The percentage doesn't matter nearly as much as the consistency. Would I prefer you save 20% instead of 5%? Of course. But I'd rather see you save 5% consistently for 20 years than save 20% sporadically for 2 years. Because wealth is not built through intensity. Wealth is built through consistency. It's not the amount you save in 1 month that transforms your life. It's the unbreakable habit of saving something every single month that creates compound magic. Think about this practically. If you save just $100 per month and invest it at a modest 8% annual return, after 30 years you'll have approximately $150,000. That's not a theory, that's mathematical certainty. That's the power of compound interest that Albert Einstein supposedly called the eighth wonder of the world. But here's what makes this even more powerful. Most people who establish the habit of saving $100 monthly don't stay at $100 monthly. As their income grows, their savings grow proportionally. So that $100 becomes $200, then $500, then $1,000. The habit remains constant, but the impact multiplies dramatically. Now, I want to address the psychological barrier. That stops most people. They say, saving such a small amount won't make a difference, so why bother? This is perhaps the most destructive financial belief that exists. Because it's not about the money, it's about the identity. When you pay yourself first consistently, you're not just building a financial account, you're building financial character. You're becoming someone who values future freedom over present comfort. You're training yourself to think long-term in a world obsessed with instant gratification. Let me share something personal. Throughout my career, I watched people with enormous incomes struggle financially, while others with modest incomes built substantial wealth. The difference was never the income, it was the discipline. High earners without discipline simply found more expensive ways to spend everything they made. Modest earners with discipline found creative ways to save regardless of their income level. And over time, over years and decades, the disciplined modest earner built more actual wealth than the undisciplined high earner every single time. So here's the practical implementation I want you to start immediately. First, decide on a percentage, even if it's just 2% or 5%. Make it sustainable, not heroic. You're not trying to impress anyone. You're trying to establish a habit that lasts forever. Second, automate it completely. Set up an automatic transfer from your checking account to a separate investment account the moment your paycheck arrives. Don't trust willpower, trust systems. Willpower fails when you're tired, stressed, or emotional. Systems operate regardless of your feelings. Third, make that transferred money psychologically unavailable. Treat it as if it doesn't exist. It's not savings. It's freedom money that you're not allowed to touch except for genuine emergencies or strategic investment opportunities. And here's a critical point about emergencies. A genuine emergency is a medical crisis, job loss, or major unexpected expense that threatens your survival or security. A genuine emergency is not a sale, a vacation opportunity, or wanting to upgrade your phone. Most people drain their financial foundation by redefining convenience as emergency. Don't fall into this trap. Protect your seeds with the same intensity you'd protect your children, because those seeds represent your future freedom. Now, let me address the other side of this equation. Paying yourself first doesn't mean neglecting legitimate responsibilities. You still pay your essential bills: housing, food, utilities, insurance. But here's the shift. You pay yourself before you pay for comfort, entertainment, and lifestyle upgrades. The order is critical. Freedom first, then comfort. Not comfort hoping freedom happens accidentally later. Because when you prioritize comfort first, freedom never arrives. The lifestyle expands infinitely to consume whatever income exists. I want you to understand something profound about human psychology. Your lifestyle will adjust to whatever constraint you establish. If you pay yourself 10 first and live on 90, within a few months that 90 feels like 100. Your brain adapts, your spending adjusts, you find creative solutions, you distinguish between what you actually need and what you simply want. But if you try to save whatever's left after spending freely, there will never be anything left. The constraint must come first, or it never comes at all. And here's the beautiful part that nobody talks about. This habit creates momentum. In the beginning, saving feels like sacrifice. After 6 months, it feels like discipline. After a year, it feels like identity. After 5 years, it feels like freedom. You stop feeling deprived. You start feeling powerful because you're watching your assets grow, your options expand, and your financial anxiety decrease. That internal shift from feeling restricted to feeling empowered is the transformation that changes everything. So ask yourself honestly right now, are you paying yourself first? Not occasionally, not when convenient, not when there's extra money, But first, automatically every single time, if the answer is no, then that's the behavior that must change immediately. Not next month, not when you get a raise, today. Because every day you delay establishing this habit is a day you're volunteering to remain financially dependent. And that dependence, that reliance on a paycheck as your sole source of security, is the most expensive decision you'll ever make. Make the shift now. Pay yourself first. Build the habit that builds everything else, the strategic framework that transforms seeds into forests. All right, now we're going to go deeper, because paying yourself first is essential. But if you don't know where to direct those funds strategically, you can still end up making expensive mistakes that delay or derail your financial freedom. I've watched countless people save diligently only to lose money through poor allocation decisions. They had discipline but lacked strategy. And in finance, discipline without strategy is like working hard while digging in the wrong location. You're exhausted but not progressing. So let me share with you a framework I developed through years of economic analysis and observation. A framework the wealthy use instinctively to allocate resources efficiently. I call it the 3-bucket strategy: safety, growth, and self-investment. Every dollar you save must flow into one of these 3 buckets, each serving a distinct purpose, each essential to your financial foundation. Bucket 1 is safety. This is your stability foundation, the financial floor beneath you that ensures you never collapse regardless of what happens in the economy, your industry, or your personal circumstances. Safety includes emergency funds, stable index funds, government or high-grade corporate bonds, dividend-paying blue-chip stocks, and paid-off essential real estate. These assets grow slowly, but they grow reliably. They're not exciting. They don't make you feel rich quickly, but they provide something infinitely more valuable: security that allows you to sleep peacefully regardless of market volatility or economic uncertainty. Most people skip this bucket entirely. They see it as boring or slow and immediately chase high returns without building a foundation. Then, when crisis strikes, and crisis always strikes eventually, they're forced to sell growth assets at the worst possible time just to survive. They panic sell investments, liquidate portfolios during crashes, and destroy years of progress because they never built a safety foundation first. This is the most common and most expensive mistake I've observed throughout my entire career. Here's the truth: you cannot build sustainable wealth without stability. A house built on sand collapses in the first storm. A financial life built without safety collapses during the first crisis. You must establish this foundation first, not eventually. First, I recommend maintaining an emergency fund covering 6 months of essential expenses plus stable, conservative investments that provide consistent, predictable returns. This bucket is not about maximizing returns, it's about minimizing catastrophic risk. Bucket 2 is growth. This is where wealth acceleration happens. This bucket includes calculated risks with higher potential returns, emerging technologies, growth stocks, real estate in developing markets, equity and scalable businesses carefully. Research cryptocurrencies and venture opportunities. These investments won't all succeed. That's the nature of growth investing. But the ones that do succeed can generate returns that dramatically outpace traditional investments. Here's the critical point: you only allocate to this bucket after your safety bucket has sufficient foundation. Most people do the opposite. They chase growth without safety and end up gambling rather than investing. They hear about someone making 500 returns on some investment and immediately dump money into it without understanding the risk, the fundamentals, or the likelihood of success. That's not investing. That's speculation driven by emotion and fear of missing out. The wealthy approach growth differently. They enter growth opportunities from a position of stability, not desperation. They can afford to lose the money they allocate to growth without destroying their financial foundation. This psychological position allows them to hold investments through volatility, avoid panic selling during downturns, and actually capture the extraordinary returns that growth investments occasionally produce. But without safety established first, you'll never have that psychological stability. You'll buy high out of excitement, sell low out of fear, and repeat this destructive pattern indefinitely. Bucket 3 is self-investment. This is the bucket most people completely ignore, yet it produces the highest return of any investment category. Why? Because every other investment can be taxed, regulated, confiscated, or destroyed by external forces. But the knowledge, skills, character, and competencies you develop cannot be taken from you. They're permanent assets that appreciate throughout your lifetime and generate returns in every area of your life. Self-investment includes books that expand your understanding, courses that sharpen your professional capabilities, mentorship from people who've achieved what you're pursuing, health practices that maintain your energy and longevity, communication and leadership development, technical skills that increase your market value, and psychological growth that enhances your decision-making. These investments don't show up on a balance sheet, but they determine the size of your balance sheet. Let me be very direct. You will never earn more than you're capable of earning based on your current skill set, mindset, and knowledge base. If you want to increase your income, you must increase your value. And value increases through continuous self-investment. The most successful people I've studied throughout my career were voracious learners who invested heavily in their own development. They read constantly, sought mentorship actively, attended educational programs regularly, and prioritized personal growth as seriously as they prioritized financial growth. And here's the mathematics that most people miss. A 10% return on your financial investments is excellent. A 1,000% return on your self-investment is common. When you learn a skill that increases your income by $10,000 annually, and that investment cost you $1,000, you've achieved a 10 times return in year one, and that return continues indefinitely. The skill keeps generating value for decades. That's why self-investment produces the highest returns. The initial investment compounds throughout your entire lifetime. Now, here's how to balance these three buckets strategically. In your early wealth-building years, typically 20s and 30s, allocate heavily to safety and self-investment. Build your emergency fund and financial foundation while simultaneously investing in skills, knowledge, and capabilities that increase your earning power. Once safety is established and income is growing, gradually increase growth allocations. In your peak earning years, typically 40s and 50s, maintain safety, maximize growth opportunistically, and continue self-investment to stay relevant and competitive. In your wealth preservation years, typically 50s and beyond, maintain growth but shift emphasis towards safety and income producing. Assets that provide cash flow without requiring active management. This isn't rigid, it's adaptive to your specific circumstances, risk tolerance, and goals. But the principle remains constant. Balance stability with opportunity while continuously investing in your own development. Never allocate everything to one bucket. Never chase returns without foundation. Never stop growing your capabilities. This balanced approach protects you from catastrophic mistakes while positioning you to capture extraordinary opportunities when they appear. It's the framework that transforms disciplined savings into sustainable wealth. Use it, refine it, make it your own. But most importantly, implement it starting immediately with the next dollar you save. The crucial distinction between looking wealthy and being free now, we need to address something uncomfortable, something that traps more people financially than any other single mistake. It's the difference between appearing wealthy and actually being free. This distinction is subtle, but it determines whether you spend your life working for your lifestyle or whether your assets fund your lifestyle. And most people get this completely backward, which is why they work for decades yet never escape financial dependence. Here's what I observed throughout my career studying economic behavior. People want the symbols of wealth before they've built the substance of wealth. They want the luxury car, the impressive apartment, the designer wardrobe, the expensive vacations. They want to look successful before they've actually become financially independent. And this impulse, this desire to signal status prematurely, destroys more financial futures than any market crash or economic recession ever could. Let me explain the mathematics of this trap. When you purchase a luxury car for $50,000, you haven't just spent $50,000. You've eliminated the opportunity for that $50,000 to generate investment returns. At an 8% annual return, that $50,000 would grow to approximately $234,000 over 20 years. So the actual cost of that car isn't $50,000, it's $234,000 in future wealth you've sacrificed for present status. But it gets worse. That car also generates monthly costs, insurance, fuel, maintenance, depreciation. So you're not just eliminating future wealth, you're creating ongoing expenses that drain cash flow month after month. Now compare that to a different decision. Instead of buying a $50,000 luxury car, you purchase a reliable $15,000 vehicle and invest the $35,000 difference into income-producing assets. Maybe dividend stocks yielding 4% annually. That generates $1,400 per year in passive income, approximately $117 monthly. You've created cash flow that arrives automatically, whether you're working or not, whether you're healthy or sick, whether you're 30 or 70. And that's just year one. As those dividends compound and you continue adding to those investments, the cash flow grows exponentially. This is the fundamental difference between a liability and an asset. A liability takes money out of your pocket every month. An asset puts money into your pocket every month. The luxury car is a liability pretending to be an asset. The investment portfolio is an asset that actually generates freedom. And here's the part most people never grasp until it's too late. Every dollar you spend on liabilities reduces your capacity to buy assets. Every dollar you invest in assets increases your capacity to afford liabilities. The wealthy understand this sequence perfectly. They build assets first, then let those assets fund their lifestyle. They don't ask, can I afford this car? They ask, do I own enough assets to generate the cash flow to pay for this car without touching my principal? If the answer is no, they don't buy the car. They continue building assets until the answer is yes. Then they buy the car guilt-free because the purchase doesn't diminish their financial foundation. It's funded by the excess cash flow their assets generate. Most people do the exact opposite. They buy the lifestyle immediately using their paycheck or worse, using debt. Then they wonder why they feel financially stressed despite earning a decent income. The stress doesn't come from insufficient income. It comes from funding liabilities with labor rather than funding lifestyle with assets. You're working to sustain an image rather than building resources that create actual freedom. Let me share a framework that changed how many people I've counseled think about purchases. Before buying anything that costs more than 1 week's salary, ask yourself 3 questions. First, is this a liability or an asset? Will it cost me money monthly or generate income monthly? Second, could I invest this money instead and use the returns to fund this purchase later? Third, am I buying this because I genuinely need it or because I want to signal status to others? These 3 questions will prevent more financial mistakes than any budgeting spreadsheet ever could. And here's the psychological trap. You must understand. We live in a culture that celebrates consumption and judges success based on visible symbols. Your coworkers see the car you drive, not the investments you own. Your friends see the apartment you rent, not the assets you're building. Social media displays lifestyle, not net worth. So there's constant social pressure to consume now, spend now, upgrade now, to look wealthy even if you're actually broke. You must develop the psychological strength to resist this pressure. You must be willing to drive a modest car while building a substantial portfolio. You must be willing to live in a smaller space while accumulating income-producing real estate. You must be willing to dress simply while investing in assets. You must be willing to appear less wealthy than your income would allow because you understand something your peers don't. Temporary status symbols provide temporary satisfaction, but permanent assets provide permanent freedom. And here's what nobody tells you about this path. There's a tipping point. For the first 5 to 10 years, building assets instead of lifestyle feels like sacrifice. You're delaying gratification while everyone around you is consuming freely. But then something remarkable happens. Your assets begin generating enough cash flow to fund your lifestyle without requiring your labor. Suddenly, you're not sacrificing anymore. You're free. Your friends are still working to maintain their lifestyle. You're working because you choose to, not because you must. That's the difference between looking rich and being free. So let me ask you directly, are you building assets or funding lifestyle? Are you investing in things that pay you or things that cost you? Are you working toward freedom or working to maintain appearances? Because you cannot do both simultaneously. Every dollar has only one job. It either builds your freedom or it builds your prison. Choose wisely. Choose assets first. Let those assets eventually fund the lifestyle you desire. That's the sequence that works. That's the path that leads to actual financial independence. Everything else is just expensive theater that keeps you trapped indefinitely. The life-changing truth about wealth, legacy, and freedom that most people never discover. We've covered essential principles: assets over income, paying yourself first, strategic allocation, cash flow over possessions. But now I want to share something that transcends tactics and touches the deepest purpose of wealth itself. Because if you get everything else right, but miss this final principle, you'll achieve financial success, but still feel empty. You'll be rich in resources, but poor in meaning. And that, my friend, is the saddest possible outcome. Here's what I discovered late in my career. After decades of studying economics, markets, and wealth creation, money is not the goal. Freedom is the goal. Contribution is the goal. Legacy is the goal. Money is simply a tool, a powerful tool, yes, but still just a tool that enables those deeper purposes. The moment you confuse the tool with the purpose, you lose your way entirely. You accumulate wealth but forfeit meaning. You gain financial abundance but lose spiritual richness. Let me explain what I mean practically. There are two types of wealthy people in this world. The first type accumulates money as an end in itself. They count their net worth obsessively. They compare themselves to others constantly. They feel anxious when markets drop and euphoric when markets rise. Their identity is wrapped entirely in their financial status. And even though they're wealthy, they're not free because they're imprisoned by their own attachment to wealth. They have resources, but they don't have peace. The second type understands that wealth is simply stored freedom, stored capability to serve, contribute, create, and impact. They accumulate assets not to impress anyone, but to buy back their time and direct their energy toward meaningful purposes. They view money as responsibility, not trophy. They see themselves as stewards, not owners. And because they're not attached to wealth emotionally, they're actually free to enjoy it and use it purposefully. Which type are you becoming? Because that decision determines not just your financial future, but your actual life experience. You can be financially wealthy, but experientially poor. Or you can be financially comfortable and experientially abundant. The difference isn't the size of your portfolio. It's your relationship with money itself. Now let's talk about legacy, because this is where wealth transcends individual benefit and becomes generational impact. Most people focus entirely on their own lifetime. They ask, how can I live comfortably? But the truly wealthy ask, how will my financial decisions impact my children, grandchildren, and beyond? They think in generations, not quarters. They build structures that outlast them, not lifestyles that die with them. And here's what most people miss about legacy. The greatest inheritance you can leave is not money, it's wisdom. Because money without wisdom disappears within one generation. I've watched it happen countless times. A family builds substantial wealth over decades of discipline, only to watch the next generation squander it completely because they inherited resources without inheriting the philosophy that created those resources. They got the assets but not the mindset. They received the seeds but never learned how to plant them. That's why the wealthy focus intensely on financial education for their children. They teach principles before they transfer assets. They require their children to demonstrate financial responsibility before granting access to wealth. They view inheritance not as entitlement, but as responsibility that must be earned through wisdom and character. Because they understand something profound, wealth is a test. It reveals character, amplifies tendencies, and either empowers or destroys depending on the recipient's preparation. So if you have children or plan to have children, your job is not to make them comfortable. Your job is to make them capable. Teach them the principles in this message. Teach them about assets versus liabilities, delayed gratification, strategic investment, cash flow, and value creation. Give them the tools to build their own wealth rather than simply waiting to inherit yours. Because the greatest gift you can give the next generation is not money. It's the capability to generate and manage money effectively. And beyond family legacy, there's contribution legacy. How are you using your resources to improve the world around you? The wealthiest people I studied weren't just accumulating, they were distributing strategically. They supported causes aligned with their values. They invested in businesses that solved meaningful problems. They created opportunities for others. They understood that true wealth is measured not by what you keep, but by what you enable. This isn't about donating recklessly or supporting every cause that requests funds. It's about recognizing that your resources carry responsibility. You've been given the opportunity to build wealth. Not everyone has that privilege. What will you do with that opportunity? Will you simply accumulate until you die, leaving a pile of resources that eventually gets dispersed by lawyers and taxes? Or will you strategically deploy your wealth during your lifetime to create impact that resonates long after you're gone? Now, let me bring all of this together with the ultimate principle, the principle that unifies everything we've discussed. Wealth is not about money. Wealth is about agency. It's about having options. It's about being able to say yes to opportunities that excite you and no to demands that drain you. It's about designing your days intentionally rather than accepting whatever circumstances impose upon you. It's about freedom to pursue meaningful work, spend time with people you love, contribute to causes you believe in, and live according to your deepest values rather than someone else's expectations. And that agency, that freedom, only comes through one path: building assets that generate cash flow independent of your labor. Not through earning more, not through working harder, not through hoping and wishing and dreaming, through systematic, disciplined, strategic allocation of resources into investments that produce income automatically. That's the path. That's the only path. Everything else is distraction. So here's my final challenge to you as we close this message. Stop thinking about money as something you chase. Start thinking about money as something you direct. You are not a victim of your financial circumstances. You are the architect of your financial future. Every decision you make either builds freedom or delays it. Every dollar you receive either becomes a seed that multiplies or consumption that disappears. Every month you either move closer to independence or remain dependent on your paycheck. The 10 rules we've covered today, they're not complicated, they're simple. But simple doesn't mean easy. Implementation requires discipline. It requires sacrifice. It requires thinking differently than everyone around you. It requires short-term discomfort for long-term freedom. Most people aren't willing to pay that price, which is why most people never escape financial dependence. But you're different. You didn't stumble upon this message accidentally. You sought it out. You've stayed with me through this entire discussion, which means you're serious about transformation. You recognize that your current path leads to a future you don't want, and you're ready to change direction. That awareness, that readiness is the essential starting point. Everything else flows from that decision. So what's your next step? Not next month, not when circumstances improve. What's your next step today? Here's what I recommend. First, calculate exactly what percentage of your income you're currently saving and investing. Be brutally honest. Second, increase that percentage by even 1% starting with your next paycheck. Make it automatic. Third, identify one liability in your life, one expense that's draining cash flow without producing value, and eliminate it immediately. Fourth, take the money you're no longer spending on that liability and redirect it into an income-producing asset. Fifth, commit to reading one book or taking one course about investing, business, or wealth building within the next 30 days. These 5 actions, if implemented immediately, will begin transforming your financial trajectory today. Not theoretically, not eventually, today. Because wealth building isn't about making one perfect decision, it's about making slightly better. Decisions consistently over long periods of time, those small decisions compound into extraordinary results if you maintain them long enough. And remember this, freedom is worth fighting for. Financial independence is worth the sacrifice. The ability to wake up each morning knowing you're not trapped by bills, not controlled by employers, not dependent on anyone for your survival. That's worth more than any car, any vacation, any status symbol you could possibly purchase. Because freedom allows you to live according to your values, pursue your purposes, and become the person you were created to be. Everything else is secondary. You now possess knowledge that most people will never hear, much less implement. You understand principles that separate the financially free from the financially dependent. You know exactly what you must do. The only question remaining is, will you do it? Will you implement these principles starting today? Will you build assets instead of just earning income? Will you pay yourself first? Will you think strategically about allocation? Will you choose cash flow over status? Will you invest in yourself continuously? Will you build legacy intentionally? The answer to those questions will determine everything about your financial future. Choose wisely, my friend. Choose assets. Choose discipline. Choose freedom. Your future self will thank you for the decision you make today. Now go. Begin building the life you deserve. One deliberate financial decision at a time. The path is clear. The principles are proven. The only variable is your commitment. Make it count.